You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
Westholme is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
Welcome back to Pizza Quest. I'm Peter Reinhardt, and I want to welcome back to Pizza Quest one of our favorite guests, pizza genius Leo Spizzirri, who way back in 2017, when we first interviewed him, we called him the greatest guy you never knew. Well, things have changed since then, as we'll soon find out, because Leo is now a well-known social media star and influencer with reels and videos all over Instagram and YouTube. He's a highly respected culinary educator and consultant, a brand ambassador for a number of products, and now he recently became the director of education at Pizza University in Beltsville, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C. Leo also has some other lesser-known talents, as we'll get into in a little while. But first, welcome back, Leo. I'm so looking forward to teaching a 3-day sourdough pizza intensive with you at Pizza University on October 21st to 23rd, which we'll talk about soon. But first, let me start by asking, when do you come up for air, brother?
Everybody has the same thing. The reality is I think I drink so much coffee during the day that I just don't sleep. So, but Peter, like, man, it's so great to be doing something with you as always. And, you know, it's great to be back here with Pizza Quest and the whole crew here and speaking to you today. And, you know, you mentioned the class that's coming up in October. Like, for me, like, I'm like a little kid. I don't know if you know this or not. Like, I'm the biggest Peter Reinhardt fanboy. And like, when I get the opportunity to hang out with you for 3 days, forget it, man. There's nothing I would rather be doing. So thank you so much for having me. And
my pleasure.
Thank you for letting me come and be your assistant, I'm going to call it, because there's no way I'm going to be shoulder to shoulder with you.
Well, we taught together a couple months ago at Pizza University on a sort of a general pizza class. We had Scott Wiener, and the three of us did a class. And I, a lot of times, just kick back and watch you work, because when you start teaching people how to shape pizza, how to stretch a pizza dough, or how to form a dough ball, you have all these techniques and tricks that are very, I can only call them classic. It seems like you've been trained so well in the art and craft of pizza. Can you talk a little bit about where that training came from? Because I know all the certifications you have and the schools that you've operated and studied under, but those techniques are not, they're way beyond anything that I was teaching. When I was telling somebody my way of stretching a dough, you were showing sort of, this is how the pros do it. So where did you learn all that?
You know, it was interesting because being a kid from Chicago, when I first started working in my first pizzeria, you know, at a very young age, in Chicago, we do tavern style, which is our main pizza. I wouldn't think it's deep dish, right? But it's really tavern style, that thin crust. And we were working at a time, think about how long ago this was, before there was even a definition of what tavern pizza was. That's right. So, you know, it wasn't something until guys like, you know, Gemignani wrote the Pizza Bible, and we're talking about the first time hearing cracker crusts or cracker thins and all this other stuff. And for us, it was just, man, that's our Chicago thin crust. You know, that's what we always said. Even guys, I want to say, like, even guys from St. Louis were saying that, you know, this is still a thin crust pizza. Nobody ever called it St. Louis style. Right. So for me, growing up in that world, we never stretched dough by hand. It was always with a double pass sheeter. And, you know, back in the day, like the Cadillac of those sheeters was a company called Annet's. You know, Annisberger was a fryer and sheeter company. And then they decided to get out of the sheeter business. So all of a sudden, that Annet's double pass sheeter became like a very rare vintage piece of equipment that was so highly sought after. And it was just a tank, two just giant stainless steel rollers, top and bottom. You could adjust the gauge, so the thickness of the dough. If you wanted to make a super thin or a cracker, man, we would have those rollers almost touching each other. And
those of us who are not from Chicago never knew about that. I mean, you knew it because you grew up with it, but we always thought of Chicago pizza as the deep dish style, because that kind of became the brand of, outside of Chicago. And yet, the more I've learned about tavern style, and from talking to you and other people who kind of grew up with that, is I realized that this is really, more the Chicago style than the deep dish.
That's right. And, it wasn't until, I would say, I didn't start stretching dough until probably like by hand, let's say. I mean, we always played around with it, right? But I never played with dough to stretch it by hand until, I would probably say, it had to have been like probably 03, 04. Think of how long ago that is. It sounds like it's
20 years
crazy,
ago,
but it's not. Yeah, it's a long time. And how many years before that I even started making pizza? So like in our house, we're just mostly pan pizzas, which was forever the style that I was known for. I was always a pan pizza guy, right? And it was.
When you say known for that, you were known for it in what way? You were working in restaurants or behind the scenes, or where were you doing that?
In the restaurants that I was working in, it was always like that Chicago stuffed pizza, right? Stuffed pizza, deep dish. Stuffed is like a pie where it's got a top layer of dough and all the cheese is in the middle, right?
Oh, we've got a great picture of one of your stuffed pizzas in the book Pizza Quest, of the cheese pull where that gooey mozzarella is just going forever.
And we just with the part of the World Pizza Champions team, and with the team, we actually just came out back in March with a cookbook, and the entire team is involved in this book. And the great thing is that all the proceeds from that book go to Make-A-Wish. So all
really, it's a beautiful book, by the way. I love the book. Yeah,
it's gorgeous, and I have it's crazy.
Let's give the name of the book a shout out here, Leo.
It's called.
We know about the book, but we don't know the name of the book.
I got it on the shelf. I forget the name of the book.
We'll get it.
The Pursuit of Pizza.
The Pursuit of Pizza. That's right. The Pursuit of Pizza. And it's kind of like it's an all-star book. It features pizzas from all of the members of the Pizza Champions team, of which you're a part, which is, I think, dates back to the early part, 20 some years ago, which is when you were learning how to properly stretch a dough, which is back to our original question.
Yeah. So when I started stretching in a way that a lot of guys were, I got to show you this one thing, because again, I think this is why everybody wants
that's the shot. Yeah.
My pizza. They want to see this stuffed pizza. And this is the one I'm known for. And the cool thing about this is that, by
the way, for those who are just listening and can't see, when Leo just held up a photo of a stuffed pizza with a piece being pulled aside with a cheese pull that goes on for about 6 or 8 inches of mozzarella. In fact, and I've got almost the exact same shot in my book. Let me find my version of it. In Pizza
Isn't it
Quest.
awesome?
We have a similar shot of that. We'll find it. Well, you keep talking while I'll find it.
They, Mike Bosch and Gemignani had told me that, like, hey, you know what? Your picture was so. Look at that. That one's even more beautiful, I think.
Well, of course, because it's my book. I think
it's your book.
We got even better shots. But you actually took the shot and sent it to me.
Yeah, it was great. And that was actually, you're right. I forgot about that. That was in my kitchen. And that pizza, just so you know, I tell people this all the time, that you can make a great pizza in your oven at home for those people who aren't professionals.
That's right. Yeah.
That pizza was baked in my probably 40-year-old trash Gen Air electric garbage oven in my kitchen, right? 480 degrees.
Yeah.
Stainless steel pan. And that was literally cut on my counter. Like, it's so crazy how beautiful you can make a pizza in your house. But
and do the recipes in the new book, The Pursuit of Pizza, are they all user friendly for home cooks?
Without a doubt. And that's really, we can get into this, as we go in, but that's really where my focus has gone over this crazy body of work of all these years of pizza friends and knowledge and industry people. It really got back to the point where after, let's call it the pandemic, we had more bakers at home than ever. And all of a sudden it was like, you know what? Why alienate anybody? Why just limit my knowledge to professionals or restaurateurs or whoever's in the industry? Why not open that up to anybody who's got maybe a portable backyard oven and let everybody have that knowledge? And you taught me this lesson like many, many years ago when I first started teaching, that it was like, you know what? You got to stay neutral. You got to be able to talk about everything, and you got to be able to talk about it to anyone. So like, when I was starting this conversation with you, to say like, you're my guy, like my mentor, like this, no joke. Like I came from the Peter Reinhardt School, and I could probably recite your TED talk on sourdough bread just to tell you this. I watched it so many times. But anyways, the question about stretching dough, all of a sudden, once I started getting serious, and I was like, look, I'm going to do more than just Chicago pizzas. I need to start actually diving into what is a New York pizza, or a pizza in a wood-fired oven. That there was no wood-fired ovens pretty much in the United States. There was only one in Chicago, I remember at that time, which was, Jonathan Goldsmith's Spaccanapoli.
Spaccanapoli, right? Yeah, he was the first one to do that true Neapolitan style in Chicago. Right.
And I never forget going by Jonathan at a time when he didn't even know who I was, right? And going over there and watching his pizzaioli actually sitting at that bench and doing that Neapolitan slapping method, right? We call a schiaffo, right? Schiaffo was like a slap, like your grandmother would give you if you're screwing around at home, right? And I never forget, like, wow, this guy is going to tear this dough. He's going to put his hand right through it. How are they doing that? And it blew my mind. So all of a sudden, I'm seeing guys in New York that are doing almost like that arm stretch where they're slapping it back and forth onto their forearms, or occasionally throwing it up in the air, which, back then it would seem like, it was a really cool thing to throw a pizza in the air. But then the reality was I only did it when like I was doing television or an interview with somebody. They would, throw the dough in the air, Right.
Well, we always thought of that as a New York thing, throwing the dough in the air.
Exactly. So all of a sudden you're diving into a world that you've never been. And I was like a kid in a candy store, because everybody that I went to see or like interact with, I realized that it was such a different way. Everybody had their own way of doing it. And I say, like, you know what? I teach like this, and I tell like students, it's not about how you're doing it. Find your own method that works, as long as we get to the same finish line, right? I don't care how you get there. Just get to the same place that I ended up, right?
It's true. But you do have a very specific technique that you teach that has to do with, the placement, dividing that dough ball into 4 quadrants and placing your fingers in such a way so that you get a perfect cornicione. And I mean, it's a technique that clearly evolved in your own formation as a master pizza maker.
When I started doing classes, amateur classes, let's call it, it was really obvious that people had no idea of, what even a dough ball was. They know it was obviously a ball of dough, but like, what was it supposed to look like? Was it supposed to be smooth? Most of these dough balls were all torn up on top. And, it was really like developing a technique to do that. And then like many years later, there was other people that I interacted with that became very close friends of mine, that were also teaching amateur classes. Like, for example, Mark and Jenny Bello from Pizza School.
New York Pizza School. Yeah.
That's right. And like, man, if you ever have a chance to talk to those guys about how they do it, like Mark can recite about 55 different points of stretching a dough all the way to topping it and put it in the oven. And he's got like a name for every step that, for him, like he's got one thing he calls the bongo method when he pushes the dough out, and he's like, yeah, we're doing soft bongos, it's like, but somebody hearing that for the first time will never forget that when they go into their home kitchen and it's ready to do it. They're like, oh yeah, the bongos,
That's good. That's good technique to teach that way. We've had Mark and Jenny on Pizza Quest in the past, but I've never gotten them to we're going to get them back and we'll have them do a demonstration of
the bongos,
bongoing out your dough. Yeah.
And it's cool.
But it's kind of like, it reminds me of something when you said that when you give it a name like that, I can't dance for beans, but I watch a lot of dance shows and I realize that there are all these very complex moves that these dancers use. And I go, how do people remember that? And then I saw one of the teasers for one where they were teaching somebody how to do certain things, and they had a name for each of the different things, like the motorcycle move, and they give it names, and giving it a name makes it stick. It makes it sticky.
And those names, I think, are what's so funny, because if you think about like when we came up, right? We came up in a time before the internet. So all the knowledge that we had to gain, it was like a really like grassroots. I mean, we really had to go to the source to even see what was happening, right? So all of a sudden, when you hear like, hey, someone else is doing like this, or you go to a trade show and you watch a guy, and it was like, I remember going through Pizza Expo, like every year it happens to me where I'm one of those guys that like, I can honestly say I make more mistakes than I have successes. And maybe not everybody sees my mistakes. All they see is like, what they see on social media, which if you live by that rule, you're going to drive yourself nuts and you'll probably end up just burning yourself out because you don't have perfection every single day or every single pizza. Things go wrong, right? But when they do go right, it's understanding what went right, or was it just a small little tweak that I made that made it better? And no different than me stretching dough. I learned, hey, I saw this guy do it like this guy did it like that, and then coming back home and just continuously practicing until I made it my own, right? And that's, I think that the way it evolved. And these little techniques for me, because I had to absorb something that wasn't a written document or a PDF or, a photograph, I had to figure out what made that muscle memory happen with me and stick with me. So that's how all these little terms came out. So like you're talking about, the different methods, or what we call them, like we've got the DJ method, right? This one.
Oh yeah,
I know on the podcast.
Like you're spinning it, for those who aren't.
When like a DJ's hitting the turntable and he's got his head cocked to the side, like he's got his headphones on. Well, we always joke around. Like if you do a table stretch, we call it a table stretch, right? Yeah. Where you're on the mound of flour and you're pushing back and forth to open up from the sides. We've called that the DJ method, right? We've got the steering wheel method, where you're opening up from the sides, where you're
that's more my technique, the steering wheel method. I hold it up in the air with use my thumbs,
holding the cornicione and pulling from the edge. There's like in Italian, sometimes we call it the butterfly method, right? Or a farfalla, right? There's a couple different names for this one, where you're folding the dough over onto your hand and kind of slapping it back and forth. But it happens here in the middle of your body, right? Where that forearm stretch, or we've called it sometimes that New York stretch, is back and forth here.
Where your arms are going from side to side. Yeah.
Neapolitan, like there's become a designation for all these different names. So if you had to go back and say, hey, I really want to dive into what that actually is, now it's nice because if you search for maybe the DJ method of stretching dough, right? Yeah. They'll probably pop up with some kind of little soundbite that I've done in the past, and at least say, hey, I see what he's doing there, or I see another guy doing it like that, and I really want to learn.
And you gave it that name. People don't realize that you're the guy that gave it that name.
Yeah, a lot because it's so crazy. Because you know how it is when you're like a trade show. Like I'm notorious for like I always dig like being up on a stage, right? Everyone likes to be up on a stage and with all people in front of you. I really am that guy that I love being on the floor, especially in a booth. And that's kind of what I'm known for at trade shows, because I'll get into a booth. And my favorite is when you get into like one of those booths that are on a small aisle where there's two booths looking at each other and everybody's in between you. And then they'll put a mic on me. And next thing you know, there's like 300 people trying to jam into this one aisle and nobody else is doing business. It's all like they're forced.
I've seen it happen. And for anyone who's ever been to Pizza Expo or any of those shows where Leo does demos, first of all, the first thing you notice is that he does a demo. And then when you go to find him again, he's not there anymore because he's doing a demo somewhere else in the hall. You got like 5 different locations within the hall and you're running from one to the other. You must burn up, 4,000 calories just getting from booth to booth to booth because you're doing demos constantly, and they're great shows. I mean, it's kind of like a lot of times when you go to trade shows and there's these guys that are selling knives or cutlery sets or pots and pans, and they know how to draw a crowd. Well, somehow, when you get going, there's 3 people there at the beginning and there's 300 people there by the end because something is happening and people are going, I want to see what this guy's doing.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. West Home stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystem. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. West Home's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so West Home ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. West Home believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westhome.com.
Peter, correct me, everything seems to be today the word masterclass, right? Everything is a masterclass, right? But it's like, man, if you come and spend an hour, right? My demos are usually an hour long, right? And most people are like, man, I learned more in this hour than I've ever heard about pizza. And I think that, again, why do we do what we do? It's really about saying, I'm going to ignite that spark that if you're really into this, you can create a forest fire. Right? I'm going to give you so much introduction or knowledge into this that you're going to want to explore this deeper, right? And that's really at the end of the day how it all happened. And again, I wasn't born a showman or anything. I dig it. I always want to be a rock star. And for me, people think it's a joke, because I've been saying this for years. I'm a huge fan of bands like Motorhead and Metallica and all these other crazy bands, right? But
I see your guitar is sitting behind you in this Zoom screenshot I'm seeing of you. Yeah, we're going to talk about those guitars in a little bit.
Cool. I got a lot of guitars and a lot of music stuff. I've been playing music since I was a kid, but it's one of those things that I always tried to say, in our industry, there's a handful of guys that get called out as rock stars all the time, right? There's one guy that we call out, probably most of people in the world would call out one person as the GOAT, right? Which we don't even need to say the name. You already know what I'm talking about. I've already said his name twice, because he's another guy that's been so influential to me, in Tony Gemignani, right? And those kinds of things, I always said, when a band goes up on stage, right? There's a look, there's a sound, there's this whole cadence of what happens. And if they did it right, at the end, it's that, everyone just screaming, it was amazing. And for me, it was always man, I would love to figure out a formula of how I can do those things. How do I get a look? How do I get a sound? How do I get a cadence? Right. Yeah. And if I do my job right, at the end, I should have that, right? Everybody so it's funny, because people don't realize it until I say it. And then all of a sudden they come and see me live and they're like, dude, there's a look. Maybe my look has become more Gucci than anything, right?
Well, but now the people can see that look if they look for you on YouTube or on Instagram, because there's tons of videos of you now with that look. You looking right into the camera and giving that little tilt to the head.
And the other thing is funny is I think all the I apologize. My computer, I'm on my desktop. It might keep dinging. Someone's trying to text me. But anyway, I apologize. I don't know how to turn it off. But that one piece became another piece, and it became another piece, until you see what you see today. It didn't all happen overnight, right? None of what I do happened overnight. It doesn't matter if it's making pizzas or learning a new style or continuously practicing and all that.
But you're leaving out one important element of this that people may not know. Some do and some don't. Is that you also, once you made that decision to go all in, you started studying with masters all over the world. So you have mentors, not Tony Gemignani being one of them, because he put together that first Pizza Champions team, and you were part of the original team. But then you studied in Italy. You found. Can you talk about some of the other master pizza makers that have trained you?
It's funny because we always end up with Tony because, again, he's he's one of those guys that was so influential in my career. And I would say like this, I would say that anybody who's at a high level in the industry would not be there today if it wasn't for Tony.
Yeah.
Right. Tony pioneered everything. I don't care who was to argue. And I'm that guy. Like, I'll get belly to belly with guys because there's a lot of jealousy in our world. Right. And it'd be like, dude, just don't, not with me here. Just stop. Whatever you're going to say, just stop, because I can feel what's going to happen. And but there is that. But it was one of those that Tony had his first class in San Francisco. It was actually in Manteca, California. It was in the back of a dealer rep, may have been an importer of pizza equipment that had ovens and prep tables and all this other stuff in there. And that's where Tony held his first class. It was in it looked like a garage, an industrial space that was set up like a test kitchen. And that's where he had his first classes. I wasn't in the first one. I would say I was in the second or third one. And Tony was really smart about how he did it, because when he started, he had just come back from Italy, became a master instructor with Scuola Italiana Pizzaioli, which was run at that time by the headmaster was Graziano Bertuzzo, right? There's been different changes at the high level of who owned that company, right? And there's been multiple layers over the years of who owned it. But the one consistent piece was that it was always Graziano's school. And I'll say it like that, right?
Is Graziano still alive and still doing it?
Graziano is still alive and kicking. He's amazing. You would think that I've got a lot of energy. Like, man, Graziano is like a little kid when you put his hands in flour. I like literally everything in the world disappears, and all of a sudden it's Graziano, and he's not even trying to put on a show. He's just trying to make a pizza. But every piece of what he does has finesse. I mean, it's polished. Right.
So Graziano, if I'm getting this right, if you talk about the tree, that have sprung from the Graziano, fountain, Tony was actually also trained by Graziano too, then brought it back to America. And now he's a tree, with thousands of branches coming off of almost every pizza maker in America has been influenced by Tony, but it may not know about Graziano.
I think that, it's an amazing story because especially when you get to Italy, right? There's so many people that unfortunately get caught up into the politics of our world that sometimes if you make a decision to switch an ingredient, all of a sudden, it's almost like you could become canceled, right? And Tony and I have had, yes, we both trained under Graziano, but we've had a lot of different maestros. We learned from a lot of different people. And to say that we went to northern Italy in the region of Veneto, right, and to study there in Venice, where you'd say, well, what does Venice have to do with pizza? Right? Pizza came from Napoli. We know this story, blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, it's like, man, if you understand what happened in Venice, it was such a cool experience. And taking that first class with Tony was the one who introduced me to all the guys in Italy. They came in to do his class. In my class, like I said, whatever, it was the second or third one. I don't know exactly which one it was, but like in my class was Mike Bosch, Joe Carlucci. I'm probably forgetting a few guys, but there was like a handful of us.
Was Siler Chapman part of that?
Siler wasn't involved. Siler was in the first class, right? And Siler's another one that, like, Siler's a great guy, but he's nuts. There's no other way I can tell you.
Oh yeah, we've had him on the show. Yeah, we know.
If you're gonna hang out with Siler, you better drink some coffee and be ready for the long haul.
High energy guy. Stop. Yeah.
But we have a good time. But that's when I met Graziano for the first time, because the Italians had come to the States to help him with his first class. And then after that first class, that's when Graziano looked at me, because I spoke fluent Italian. I learned Italian before I learned English, as a kid. And it was one of those experiences that Graziano was like, look, I see something in you that I don't see a lot. And I know I'm here in the United States for the first time or whatever it was, but this is not common. And I want to invite you if you can make it to Italy, I want to invite you to one of my classes and I want you to sit in. And that's what hooked me. I never forget this. I had just gotten divorced, right? I had a 2-year-old daughter at that point, and I was at that crossroads in my life where I was like, if anything is ever going to be presenting itself that there's another page or another flip of the chapter, this is it, right? And I never forget, I went home and I talked to my mom and dad, right? My family is like, we're so, obviously Italians, we're so deep with our families, right?
Yeah.
And I never forget having that conversation with my mom and dad saying, I want to go to pizza school. And they're looking at me like, you already know how to make pizza. Like, what do you mean you're going to go to school and learn pizza? I'm like, no, I want to go to Italy to learn pizza. And that was when all of a sudden it got silent. Because for my parents being immigrants, to come to the United States, right? Yeah. That they weren't born. I'm first generation here, right? And to come here with the American dream in their minds that, maybe my kid's going to be a doctor or a lawyer, which is pretty comical if you know who I am, right? Like, I'm never going to be a doctor or a lawyer, right? But
a doctor of dough.
They were like, yeah, we'll help you figure this out. If this is truly where you think that this is taking you, we're going to help you figure this out. And I never forget, I got on a plane. I flew from Chicago to JFK in New York. I'm sitting there by myself, and it was the reality of, Leo, what the hell are you doing, right? And I got on that plane. I'll never forget it. I actually have this small little thing I was typing, and I was like, I talking about like Forno Bravo. I see Forno Bravo on your Pizza Quest shirt, right?
That's right.
There was a group of people there. Forno Bravo, like, really was the first ones who pushed me into that spotlight, right? That's
where I first met you. You were doing a demo at the Forno Bravo booth at Pizza Expo.
That's right. And that's when I first met you. And they were really the first ones to say, hey, we'll give you a platform because it sounds like you have a bunch to say and maybe nobody even knows that you need to say it, right? And it was them who were like, hey, you know what? Every time we try to record you, it sounds like, like the radio. It's just like, wah, 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 like the Charlie Brown school teacher, right? And I'm like, what is this? And I was like, well, I don't know. I never talked in front of people. I don't even know how to act. And then all of a sudden, it was like, just be you. Don't worry about the people. Nobody's going to say anything because the information that you're giving, they're just going to be on the edge of their seats for. And then I was asked by them to write a blurb. They have something on their website that they do, like recipes, and they have something for their community. They have a name for it. But anyways,
there's like a community forum or something like that.
Yeah, something like this. And they said, can you write a piece, almost like an essay, that we can post for our people, right? Our community. I was okay, sure. So I wrote this thing, and all of a sudden it came back to me, and they're like, Leo, same thing. Like, this is so dry. Like, what happened? Like, when you talk to us, like you and I are talking right now, there's so much energy and it's so engaging. And all of a sudden it went like, like you're sitting in the back of the classroom, and
it's a different medium, totally, writing something like that. Yeah.
So all of a sudden it was those guys that were like, just write it the way you would say it. And if you're going to say it, if you're going to put an F-bomb on it as an exclamation point, put the F-bomb in there. And I was like, man, no one's ever told me this, right? So all of a sudden, like, that's how this whole thing started rolling. But to go back to Italy now, I'm sitting on the plane and I'm thinking about these stories of like, just write, just keep writing. It's something like, even if you're going to forget something, at least you can go back. And I've got notebooks and books and all this stuff all over the place. I'm not a big computer guy. As much as everyone thinks that I got all this technology, I'm really not. I don't know crap about technology, right? But I have notebooks and stuff everywhere, and everything is written down. So I never forget, I'm sitting on the plane, and I've got the Misfits playing on my headphones, and I'm trying to just relax because at that point, I haven't flown too much either. And I'm like scared. I don't even understand how an airplane stays up in the air and all the people. And like, I don't even want to go in the first place now. I'm getting nervous. So I start writing. And in this thing, it's like, what is more American than this kid from Chicago sitting on a plane, listening to the Misfits, heading to Italy to learn about pizza in a world that it's like, do people even care about this besides me? And then all of a sudden I arrive, I get to Venice, and I'm with Graziano and like 8 other students in this class. And I can understand Italian. Obviously, I can speak Italian fluently. And I'm sitting in this class and I can overhear these other students, kids my age, right?
Yeah.
I can overhear them like talking shit about me. And like the American is here, right? And then in my head, I'm like, I'm gonna play this that I'm an American and I don't know the language. I'm gonna play this as long as I can so I can hear what everybody is saying.
Yeah. Don't let them know that you know. Yeah.
And it was one of those things that even like talking about this, like even with guys like Tony or people that have been through this, it was always the same thing that we were American pizza makers. We were never considered pizzaioli, right? And it wasn't until much later that we flipped it, because I think that the Italians saw how much passion that we had for what we were doing, that we didn't want to Americanize it. We weren't all pineapple pizza guys, right? We wanted to figure out where this all started, right? And when I took that first class with Graziano, I made a lot of mistakes, and I did that, but that's the whole point of going to school. And Graziano was so patient and like would literally come up and like grab my hands and move them to the right place, or be like, don't do this, do this, and that whole hands-on approach to teaching. And I think that's where I caught the bug of, if I had to teach other people when I get home how to do this, how are all these little golden nuggets going to come out? And I think that was the first time when I started explaining colorfully these techniques. And then from there, I went back. It was probably 15 years talking about how many times I went back. And every time I went there, it was now with a goal of, I'm not only going for this certification, but my goal is that I want to get a master certification in this. I want to do it to the highest level. And next thing I know, I've got 5 master certifications in all their styles. Right? Think about how much studying and how much work and practice, going to Italy, coming back home, trying to find these ingredients that sometimes were non-existent. Like I remember calling General Mills. I called the hotline at General Mills to ask them what the W factor of all Trump's flour was. Crickets. Nobody knew what I was even talking about.
Right.
Oh, you say W factor. It's like, oh, that's simple. We're talking about a value that's given by a machine that tests gluten. And we're talking about strength of gluten. And now it's like people like you would say that. But back in the day, again, it would be crickets even outside of a certain group that would even know what we're talking about when we talk about a gluten net.
Well, it's interesting as you describe this story. It very much parallels what happened in the artisan bread world just prior to. I think the artisan bread world kind of grew up in the 90s and in the early 2000s and spilled over into the pizza world, and the two communities kind of merged. But the American bread makers were met with the exact same kind of disdain by the French bread makers and the German bread makers, because we were like these upstarts who, being Americans, acted like we knew what we were doing, but we were still learning. But something happened to flip that switch, and the passion that drove the bread making community here to learn the craft and study with these great bakers, elevated the quality of bread in America in a way that is, now respected on the world stage. And that seemed to have happened in the pizza world as well, like as the way you're describing it. And now, our pizza makers here, American pizza makers, are winning world championships and, highly respected everywhere. Whereas like when Tony he tells the story of when he won his first, world championship in Naples, he had to fight for every point that he got because they wanted him to lose. They were trying to sabotage him.
That's right.
And so now, it's a different story. And I think in order to get through all that, from what I'm hearing your story, that you have to love what you're doing so much to be able to persevere through all the training, the teaching, the humiliation, the insults, everything that you went through to get there.
That was a big piece, Peter. I mean, I grew up in the restaurant industry. I grew up in the restaurant business, right? There's no other way around it. Bourdain used to say that, at that time back then, like, it wasn't glamorous. It wasn't white chef coats and guys screaming "bam" in the kitchen, right? And it was who was in the kitchen with us. It was people who didn't speak a lot of English.
Mm-hmm.
It was criminals, ex-cons, drug addicts, alcoholics, right? It was dirty. It was a different world. And that rapport that you had with the guy who was working next to you was usually that if this guy had a problem with you, he'd probably launch a hot saute pan at you or something, right?
Right.
And with no problem doing it. Now, all of a sudden, like we talk about this like new show, like The Bear came out, right? I remember when The Bear first came out, that first couple episodes, it was amazing because I'm like, we fought so hard to get away from this image in our industry. And now we've put it in Hollywood and we made this a dramatic thing that this is how it is. This is like the worst thing that could ever happen. But then through the progression of that show, all of a sudden they started to show, hey, it became more clean and polished and a fine-tuned machine.
Well, they turned around in 2 or 3 seasons what it's taken our industry to 20 years to turn around.
Yes, exactly. And that was what I like. To me, going to Italy, it was so different there because this was the first time that as a pizza maker, I felt like I was dealing with professionals. And you talked about bakers. Like, I came home and I really, because I heard, like, for the first time, I'm hearing terms like biga and poolish, which all came from the bread world.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, I'm digging in and I'm trying to find any information I can get and talk to anybody who knows how to make dough. And like, I can remember the first time, you can speak about this guy. I can never forget, like, I remember meeting Dieter Rosato for the first time. Right. And I don't know, have you ever worked with Dieter?
Yeah, we got to come Didier Rosato.
Again, as the American, I'm not going to say the French way, right?
He's one of the French bakers who came over and did for us what Graziano did for you, trained Americans in classic French baking techniques. And he's now baking out of Washington, D.C. We're going to be seeing him in a couple of weeks when we teach our pizza class at Pizza University.
He's an amazing guy. Just as a person, he's an amazing guy. And as a baker, I think he's for sure forgotten more than he's ever been able to teach people, right? It's just an amazing way to learn. And for me, to see a guy like that applying it to bread, and I was like, well, for me, I want to learn more about dough. Anybody could top a pizza, but I've always been known as a dough guy too, right? And I always wanted to dig into all the different formulas and what makes a style this and what's the difference of that. And you start seeing, well, equipment can change your dough and all these different things can change your dough. But when do you pull the card, right? Or when do you play a certain card? And it was guys like Dieter that was one of the first people that were like, oh, it's cute. You're a pizza maker, like you're not a baker. And that was the first time. It was like, either be a pro like the rest of us, or go back to Chicago and be a pizza maker. And that was where all of a sudden is like, if I'm working, guess what? You're never going to see me without a pair of white pants on. Why? Because that's the uniform of a baker, right?
Yep.
And white T-shirts. I know now everybody's got chef coats, right? Nobody ever baked with a chef coat on. Right? Everybody I knew that baked were with white T-shirts, right? And an apron. And we tied it on and we did our 3 a.m. And all of a sudden, I think that became my life. And even coming back to Chicago, I was very fortunate to work with another baker named Rich Labriola, who owned the Dawson Bread Company in Chicago.
Famous bread company, yeah.
Very famous bread company. And I never forget, like, Rich Labriola came to Pizza Expo one year, and we had a conversation, and he's like, hey, listen, I'm going to say it to you like this. He's like, you might be a great pizza guy, but until you learn how to make bread, you're not shit. And literally he said it to me like that, Peter. It's another one of those moments where I took a step back and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, people are like lining up to talk to me. And you're going to tell me I'm not shit? And he's like, think about what I'm telling you. When you get serious about baking, come talk to me and I'm going to give you a job. And I'm like, I want a job making bread. And then all of a sudden, like months, I would constantly run into Rich when we came back to Chicago. Chicago. And he'd hand me his card, and he's like, I'm still waiting for your call. I'm still waiting for your call. Until finally I went there. And he's like, you know what? I want you to go work in my main facility. I don't want you to tell anybody what you do and what you know. He put me with, at that time, an 80-year-old German baker named Heinz, right? And I literally sat at a bench. We would literally do like a month worth of, I only want you rolling batards, right? Or I only want you hand forming baguettes, right? So all of a sudden, you getting that table work, and you talked about the technique of stretching dough. It's all of a sudden learning how the gentle touch of your hand needs to be. And if you do that correctly, all of a sudden you haven't degassed this dough, and the pizza that comes out is naturally better because it's more open and light and airier, and we haven't affected the gluten again. And there's so many different things that I learned from the bread world that once I started applying it to my pizza making, it like I said, it just blew the doors off.
And that's the perfect example and the personification of this, the coming together of the bread and the pizza worlds, and into creating something really totally unique and original, here in this country. And we could talk about this for hours, but we're just about out of time. And before we run out of time, there's two things I want to talk about with you, Leo. One is that we are going to teach a class together in a 3-day intensive at the Pizza University. So I want our listeners to know that if they'd like to attend, go to the Pizza University website, pizzauniversity.org, and look for our class. It's coming up October 21st to 23rd, and it's going to be sourdough. It's all about sourdough because that's the next big thing. I've got my sourdough starter right here. I'm holding it up to the camera, and it's bubbling away, and I'm going to be bringing it with me when I see you in a few weeks. So folks, go to that. It's not a cheap class. It's going to be, if you want to come, it's going to be we'll call it a master class, but it's a class.
3 days.
3 days of intensity. Yeah.
Listen, they could charge anything for that class. To spend 3 days with you unscripted, any question you ever want to ask in real time, how do you put a price on that? Right. To be able to
and it's a lot of fun. We even get a factory tour of the Mariforni oven refractory, the company where they build the ovens. There's a lot of things that go on there. So look up the website. I don't want to spend too much time on it because we're running out of time, because I do want to spend the last minute with you talking about your guitar collection, because I mentioned early in the intro that you have other interests besides everything we've been talking about for the last hour, and we can see your passion for that. Imagine taking that. I'm telling this to the listeners, the passion that we've been just exploring with Leo about his pizza and dough making, transfer it to guitars and restoring vintage guitars. Isn't that one of your hobbies?
Yeah, it started out as a kid. I started playing the saxophone very young, and from saxophone, I played around other instruments and drums and bass and all this other stuff. And my love has always been guitars. Right. And there was a time in my life when it was like, you know what, this little hobby that you have on the side, you can't do it too much because you need to go to work. Right. And by the time I would get home from work at night, sometimes after midnight, it wasn't like I was sitting around turning up the amp to 11 and, cranking, whatever I was thinking about. But it was one of those things to me that over the years, it was a way to silence my day and everything, the craziness of the pizza world, right? Because my head doesn't stop. And all of a sudden, as soon as I switched over and I put a guitar in my hands, everything was just the focus of that guitar. And it wasn't until like a few years back that, I even started telling my wife, I'm gonna get a couple of guitars, and I think I want a guitar. It was actually one guitar, a very specific guitar I wanted. I'm a huge music fanatic. I'm into punk and rock and roll history. And all of a sudden, there was this one guy, my mentor, the one that I look at the most, is a guy named Brian Setzer. Brian Setzer from the Stray Cats, right?
Brian Setzer,
and that sound, that rockabilly sound, was something to me that I always dug. And I was like, you know what? If I get a guitar, I want to rebuild a guitar that he had just put at that time. This is years ago. He had put his original orange Stray Cats guitar in the Smithsonian. It ended up. And I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. I would love to rebuild, they call it the Lady Luck, right? Or the Lucky Lady, right? I would love to rebuild that guitar that he put in the Smithsonian. Well, he was 17 years old, didn't have any money, and it was Frankenstein together, right? And every time he would get something, he would put something new and make it sound good, right, or whatever. Uh-huh. It was a 50s Chet Atkins Gretsch 6120 guitar. I'll put it on just so you see for reference.
Okay, so he's going to go get the guitar and bring it to for those who are able to watch this. And if you're listening to it on the audio, go to pizzaquest.com and you can watch all this on video. So okay, he's holding up the guitar to the camera.
This is my first guitar. This is my Gretsch, and you see like the stickers and the dice and all that. This was as close as I could get this to Setzer's guitar that was in the Smithsonian. And you see mine is actually so shiny. He actually took like triple grit steel wool and he scrubbed all the finish off of it so it was dull. And because at that time he didn't want to take a country guitar. This was known as a country guitar and play rockabilly music with it. He wanted to be rock and roll and hot rods and all that. So this is why he took all the stickers and all this other stuff. But like, I ended up pulling everything out. I followed his journey of what his guitar went through. I got his pickups in here. It's a company called TV Jones. I ended up calling those guys up, and they're like, yeah, we can get you exactly the pickups that Setzer's got. All the wiring got redone to his stuff. I had a luthier here in Chicago actually put the dice knobs on here. I made these my own. His are white. I put black on there.
So basically what you've done is you've created a replica of the Lucky Lady.
Yeah, and it's really cool because like all the pieces of this, I mean, this is like months and months of research, and then to reach out to people and do all that. It's just like it became almost like an obsession on the side of me obsessing about pizza. Yeah, right. And it was really cool
obsessions upon obsessions.
All these,
Leo, you can see that we could go down this rabbit hole for another 2-3 hours talking about this, and I think we are because we're gonna have you back. We're gonna spend a whole show just talking about this side of Leo Spizzirri because it's fascinating. I think that you're the same passion that people respond to when we see you at Pizza Expo and everywhere else when you're doing demonstrations and your videos. The same thing. You have that same, passion and love. And I've seen you and Scott Wiener, who has an equal love for guitars and this kind of music arcane, geeking out over this stuff. So I want to try to capture that. We want to get for our viewers and listeners, many of whom share a lot of the same journey that you and I share, including the music side. So we'll do a whole show. We'll dedicate a whole show to
I would love that.
Bringing people up to date on this aspect of your obsession world, because we want to hear more about your guitars and everything you've done with some of the other guitars that you've rebuilt, and everything that you can share and know about that. It'll be our guitar quest in addition to our pizza quest.
I'm in, man.
Leo, I'm looking forward to seeing you on October 21st in Beltsville, Maryland, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. at Pizza University. We're going to have 3 days of crazy sourdough intensity, I guess is the best way to say it. And hopefully we'll see some of you there as well. And I want to thank all of you who are joining us today for being part of Pizza Quest. Continue to come back. We'll be back next week with a new show. But until then, thank you for being part of Pizza Quest. And remember, it's more about the quest than it is even about the pizza. Leo, thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Peter.
Pizza Quest is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.